Okay, now we're live. Excellent. Righty-ho. Thank you. Coalition of the Willing, three men in a boat, Jason J. Smart, Chuck Farrer, and myself. We're reconvening after the Lancaster House. And as I just said earlier, whilst we're not live, I'm going to open a decent wine now because we have had a momentous change, at least something consequential. Perfect? But we're getting there because for the first time since the full-scale invasion, somebody used the term coalition of the willing and was willing to put something to it. Keir Starmer said that they are willing to back this with boots on the ground, planes. Last one who spoke about this on our program was former Air Marshal Greg Bagwell, was arguing for that right at the beginning in spring 2022. Another one who argued about this, British forces and others would have to be on site at some point in time, was John Foreman here on our program. So we're back to this. Jason, how does that sound for you, given the fact that you are swinging back and forth between Ukraine and the rest of the world? Chuck, how does it sound for both of you? British boots, the British Army of the Dnipro.
Well, it's obviously a step in the right direction. Oh, there's Chuck. Sorry, Chuck. I thought you were frozen. Please go.
No, please go ahead, Jason. I'm sorry. We have a delay, folks. Jason, please, I'll follow you up.
Sure. So I think it sounds great. Listen, it's a good first step. It's not clear a lot of the details still and where it's going to go, but it's definitely something that we need to see. And the fact is that Europe has to step up its game in protecting Europe. And protecting Europe includes protecting Ukraine, because ultimately that's the only sort of future the Ukraine could hope to have that's peaceful. But Chuck, what do you think about it?
Well, it remains to be seen, but I think this is
Chuck, right?
Yes, but this is something I don't think Moscow is going to like. I don't think they expected Europe to go this far. I mean, when you are mentioning peacekeeping forces, when you are mentioning air forces and their areas of responsibility, when you are mentioning British aircraft in Ukrainian airspace and the British Army of the Dnipro, those are some maneuvers, if they materialize, that could change the complexion of the war. And as I was saying earlier, look, these peace talks don't need to go forward next week before Ukraine loses the war. Nothing has changed from when we did our morning show. Look, it's Moscow that so desperately needs a peace deal. And Moscow, I don't think, is prepared and possibly is not willing to accept the fact that there are going to be NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. And frankly, I'm surprised myself.
Question now for you, Jason.
Axel, what do you think?
Ukraine, well, I would pitch it to you as a veiled, as a veiled argument and question. My argument is that this is a significant change from the demand on Friday, where evidently President Trump implied, and halfway stated that Ukraine would have to agree to a ceasefire, and that the ceasefire in itself was a precondition for achieving peace. Whereas Keir Starmer very clearly stated today that a sensible plan, including peacekeeping, would have to be created and will be created by the UK, France, leaders of European nations. It will be funded, and then it will be discussed. And this plan will be formulated with Ukraine, and then discussed with the Americans. So this is a proper setup of creating one position of the free nations, which is completely different. It's the antithesis to what Trump suggested. And at the same time, it is something which I hear from the statement he made, that Meloni and he had argued with President Trump in the last 24 hours. That in itself is a change, and it's a change which comes from Europe. How do you see this reflects more of what the Ukrainians needed and wanted, correct?
Sure. I mean, the Ukrainians definitely want to have greater support. They need to have greater support. And security guarantees without Europe or the U.S. is sort of foolish. So I think that this sort of a step, though, where the Europeans have shown that they're very serious about their own security by providing security to Ukraine, is something that we should have expected. But unfortunately, it's taken so long to have such firm commitments, at least the proposal of such firm commitments, come out. I think the big question is going to be how this materializes in real terms. There's been a lot of speech. A lot of people said a lot of things for now 3 years. But where does this actually take us? What is this going to mean in real terms? Remains to be seen. So I think it's going to be a path ahead. But Chuck, what do you think it would look like? And what do you think is what would real security look like? Or what sort of participation from Europe would be necessary to achieve what they're seeking to achieve?
That 2, 3, 4, in the case of Lebanon, 6, 8. And generally, peacekeeping forces, two things you can predict. Generally, they are unprepared to enter into full scale combat. And B, they will inevitably get shot at. There is absolutely no question of that. Um, I'm still trying to make. I was one of those optimists who kept looking for the pony among all the horse poop at Christmas time. And if anything good has come out of the despicable way that President Zelensky was treated in the Oval Office, it is a shot of adrenaline into the arm of NATO, which has frankly taken the bit in its teeth right now. They are proposing real steps that could lead to real solutions. And I am delighted to say that they're doing this without any guidance from the United States, with the exception of a really bad example of how diplomacy is conducted. You know what? I don't see anything good or happy in this for Moscow. I think that Mr. Lavrov right now is chain smoking in the outer offices of his boss and trying to spin this as well as he possibly can. I don't think anyone expected this on the Kremlin side. They expected more dithering, more feet dragging, uh, drips and drabs, arms, maybe some missiles in support. But now talking boots on the ground and planes in the air, that is a big, big step. Think about what that means. That's going to mean AWACS planes patrolling over Ukrainian airspace. What are these fighters going to do? They are going to be intercepting Russian cruise missiles. You know, per force, that's going to change the complexion of the war. We have to see what happens, right? Big speeches. Now let's see big actions.
It's the first time somebody said boots on the ground and planes, and that is significant, I think, because nobody dared do it last 3.
No, they really haven't. Um, there are solutions to this war, in my estimation, that don't involve NATO boots on the ground. Adequate supplies of arms, materials, training. Uh, I am convinced, from what I know about this war, that if the Ukrainians are given the tools necessary for modern ground maneuver warfare, they themselves could take Russia on and move the zero line. But having NATO at your back, and I mean literally in country, I mean, that's a big step, Jason. And the geopolitical ramifications of that, I think you're better qualified to comment on those than I am.
Well, I think that has a lot of effects. I mean, the fact is that the countries involved also have regional issues with Russia, and this is a good chance to try to distract from that. Let's remember that France has lost a lot of Francophone Africa in the past couple of years due to the fact of Russia's intervention there. We see that Russia has been doing its very best to destabilize things in other parts of the world. where the British had also had its relations. I mean, if we look at South Africa, the close relationship that Russia enjoys with the government there currently, we can look what's happening with countries without Latin America. So I'm curious what Spain is going to end up doing. But in the case of Latin America, we see that Russia's had a huge influence and continues to have influence with a number of countries there. And I think that overall, the British have always had a very important role, clearly. But looking ahead, they realize that this is also a very important moment to show leadership on the continent. This is a moment that truly that they can be working closely with their partners, their colleagues in Europe to provide security there. And I think that Britain obviously is a country that will play a leadership role in this for a lot of reasons, historic as well as just economic size and military size. But what's going ahead, since the biggest one has gotten in, the British, I think that's where it becomes easier to get the other countries to start joining in. And once you need the heavyweight. So once you have one heavyweight, it gets easier to have the rest come on. And so the British as the anchor, bringing in other countries, I think will be really key. And it definitely does change the dynamics of the region as a whole. And I think that the breakdown relations with the United States is another huge shift. And that's the Americans' own fault. I mean, that flatly lays on their doorstep because that was a choice they made. People that I think don't understand is that the reason the U.S. played the huge role, played in NATO for all those years, outside of just the economic reason, is that there's a huge benefit when you're the one in charge. You want to be that guy. You want to be the one who's selling your weaponry to all these other countries, who's able to sort of force through that they have to use your systems. And it gives you control over a lot of what they do. You also are able to intercept, if they're using your information systems, everything they're doing. There's a lot of reasons we had to benefit from doing that. But having lost that, or having forced Europeans to find other alternatives, and having lost that, we've disadvantaged America. And the U.S. defense industry will suffer from that due to Donald Trump's decisions. So this is something that no longer is Trump getting a $500 billion deal with minerals from Ukraine. Now he's actually just going to further erode American influence globally, as well as hurt the American industries that have been cooperating with its European military partners. And Axel, what do you say?
Into arguments. Thank you for highlighting that both Britain as well as France in the last 2 decades have had difficulty projecting power. Britain more soft than hard. France also with military capabilities diminished in Africa. And thus, this is a turning point in how they project power if and when they put real capabilities behind it. And this brings us back to the topic on which we ended earlier today, that the overall capabilities in Europe need to be rejigged. They need to be improved, some of which will take a decade, if not longer, to build up. There's a couple of them which we actually need to replace very, very quickly, and probably we'll have to talk to a number of people at, say, Airbus about, because strategic airlift capabilities are absolutely vital for supporting Ukraine. And if the US stops what it does at the moment in Zhezhov, that will have an impact. Yes, of course, we won't be hauling a lot of stuff from the US across, but at the same time, you still need that capability. You can't send stuff from Spain or from Britain only by train. It's not going to happen. You need to have a different capability. And you need to, at some point in time, if you go in and at a stage where you feel comfortable doing air policing after, say, a ceasefire, but in view of an armistice being negotiated, you are inside Ukraine, you will want to have your aircraft stationed on NATO soil, probably in Romania and in Poland and the likes. But you will have to have you have to have maintenance crews available, even for touchdowns in Ukraine, and you have to have strategic airlift capacity, which we do not as Europeans in that format. A little bit the Bundeswehr, yes, a little bit the RAF, a bit the Swedes and whatnot, but it's not on that level. The same goes for short-range air defense. We are naked for naval SHORAD, or nearly naked, in Europe, and we are very, very low on other capabilities. So in helping Ukraine do this and project a peacekeeping force's capacity to deter the Russians infringing upon it, that will require massive investment. So it's a good sign today, and if they follow through, we might be able to do it. But my view today, this war continues for at least another 1.5 years, unabated, without a ceasefire, because the Russians won't want it, and they will gamble on their asymmetric warfare capacity to give them a better deal, whilst their economy will break apart. And we'll see each other again next year at some point in time. And then maybe Russia just simply crumbles. My view. What's yours?
Well, in my opinion, we are not seeing the beginning of the end of the Ukraine war. This isn't the beginning of the end. Some chess pieces are now being moved. It's going to be interesting to see, as Jason pointed out, what Washington can do to recover from this There is no minerals deal, and it's very unlikely that there will be one.
So, Mr. Farah fell off. Okay, whilst that is being said, let me just come up with one thing which came from the press conference of Alexander Stubb, and then we're nearly finished, and I think, Jason, you will have to go anyway. You said at least. Stubb says that he highlights that Ukraine needs a stronger position, needs more support, tougher sanctions on Russia, as you have advocated many times yourself, and then the immediate use of frozen assets, which should be combined with a security arrangement funded. So in order to pay for the added, Mr. Stubb is a very pragmatic person. He wants to be able for the EU to pay for the build out of defense capacity in Europe. It's not wrong. I don't mind this. It's not wrong. But using the frozen assets to do so then actually is a very clear signal to Russia where Europe stands.
Well, it's certainly a good sign. I mean, it's a good sign that Europe remains strong, unlike the United States.
I'm back now, apparently.
And I am very sure that Russia is concerned by this. I think that ultimately we will see a change of U.S. policy just because this is becoming increasingly just a mess for the U.S. long term. And this doesn't work out very well for a wide host of reasons. And this is just shows short-sightedness. And I think that overall, this will be something that Trump will come to regret. But it was, once again, the bed he made in. And this was not just the blow up at the White House a couple of days ago. This is something greater. This is a strategic decision he made from the very beginning of his administration that Ukraine was done with. He decided he was going to force a peace that wasn't to be found, that he was not going to give any security guarantees. It was just all sort of absurd from the very beginning. And at the end, I think that Zelensky very well understood that. Let's be honest, is that why would Zelensky sign a $500 billion deal with the Americans who were not going to give you any actual on paper guarantees? They're not going to provide you with more weapons. They've not guaranteed that they'll even sell you more weapons. So why would you want to give them this deal with nothing in return? But then we will negotiate the terms of peace with Russia without your participation. And the security guarantees, should there be any, will come from the Europeans, who we won't consult with and will not invite to come to negotiations either. So you're negotiating with Russia something that can be only guaranteed by Europe, but we won't tell the Europeans what they have to guarantee, and you should pay us money for that, and we will do nothing, and we won't even guarantee we'll let the Europeans sell you weapons or send you weapons that are coming from the U.S. or produced by the U.S. And just the end-user agreements, the Europeans can't just send over American weaponry without U.S. agreement. And there is no reason to believe that Trump would have just said, no, you can't send any more things that have U.S. components to Ukraine in order for him to force a peace. So I think that ultimately, actually I'm sort of thankful, I think at the end of the day, this whole deal fell apart with the minerals. And I think that Europe now sees that there's a advantage. There's a positive for this, for everybody, but especially for the Europeans, and I think ultimately for you.
Very good. Chuck, last questions, and then for you and also for Jason very briefly. What do you think, based on what Jason just argued, and I tend to agree with him, how long will it take the current White House or the current administration to rearrange its position? I mean, they have to find a way to declare victory, despite the fact that they may not have gotten what they intended. But how long does it take for them to find a way to integrate themselves with that approach?
I think the White House is going to really be looking at what some poll numbers say. I don't think that Vice President Vance was happy to see protesters running into him at the ski resort in Vermont. The average American on the street knows what's right and what's wrong. they are pro-Ukraine. They see Ukraine as the victim of Russian aggression. And it is, frankly, it's reprehensible to say to your neighbor, I know your house is on fire and I'll help you put it out, but I want your stereo and your flat screen TV. Here's what I think, though. I think that the White House may take this as a priority to try to salvage some of this mineral deal because they need something to bring back to the table. I think that President Zelensky did very well to say, just as Jason summarized, look, you're not guaranteeing me anything except my minerals are going to be going to the United States. And President Zelensky remembers, even if President Trump doesn't even know where this is on a map, but Ukraine has already been down the road with the Budapest declarations. Look, Ukraine needs tangible, real security guarantees. And we're on the way to that. Let's see if these things actually materialize. Airplanes in the air, boots on the ground. And again, Russia is a wild card in this as well. None of this is going to make Putin happy. And frankly, too bad.
Alrighty. Multinational Corps Southeast. Armée de l'Orient. British Army of the Dnipro. So it shall be. Thank you very much, Jason, Chuck. Good wrap up. And to our audience, please feel free, go back. You can rewatch this. And unfortunately, the quality is not perfect because we had to set this up at short notice. But you can also see what we discussed a little earlier today in the run up to the summit. Thank you very much. Cheers, guys. Slava Ukraini.